Hello, everyone. My name is Agon Hamza, and as always, I'm here with my friend and colleague Frank Ruda, my co-host of Christ and Critique podcast, Philosophy and its Other Scene. We are very happy to welcome you to the new episode of the podcast with a very exciting guest, whom I will introduce in a moment. But before doing that, Frank and I have just a few brief comments and announcements to make. First, we are working on the new issue of Christ and Critique journal, which is planned for the publication in late May or the latest early June. It will be devoted to the work of Slavoj Žižek, and we expect another issue to be out in late 2025. We would really appreciate if you would subscribe to our YouTube, Spotify, and other subscribable channels that we have. And if you like the work that we are doing both with the journal as well as with the podcast, please consider supporting us at the Patreon page. All these links are available below in the description. And now it is time to introduce our guest for this episode. Frank and I are very happy to welcome Rebecca Comay to the new episode of Christ and Critique podcast. Rebecca Comay is a professor of philosophy and comparative literature at the University of Toronto, where she also directs the program of literary studies. Additionally, she is an associate member of both the German Department and Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Toronto. And at the same time, she is a professor of philosophy at the European Graduate School. I will not enumerate very many papers and book chapters that Comay has written, but we will limit ourselves only to mentioning a few books of her. First, Endings, Questions of Memory in Hegel and Heidegger, which she co-edited with John McCumber, published in 1999. The second one, Hegel and Resistance, History, Politics, and Dialectics, edited with Bart Zandworth, published in 2018. Morning Sickness, Hegel and the French Revolution, published in 2010. And The Other Side of Absolute Knowing, co-authored with Frank Ruda, published in 2018. In addition, there are 3 other books that Rebecca is working on or has completed. 2 of them will be published next year, or so we hear. Comay's doctoral work, which she completed at the University of Toronto, focused on the work of Hegel and Heidegger. The title of her dissertation was Beyond Aufhebung, Reflections of the Bad Infinite. She has written extensively on German idealism, Marx, Frankfurt School, aesthetics, poetry, film, sculpture, and we will try to cover as many fields of her research as possible in our conversation today, including her forthcoming books. And now I give the floor to my friend Frank to start off our conversation. Rebecca, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Thanks for having me.
Hi. Good to see you, and good to see you here. We thought we start different from what people may be expecting from us, namely to talk about your much acclaimed work on Hegel and the French Revolution. But we thought we could start by going into discussing your current projects, of which there are quite a few. I mean, you indicate on your online presence, your homepage, that you are working on 3 different book projects at the moment, and there will be, as Agon just said, 2 books coming out in the next 2 years. So one is scheduled for 26 and one is scheduled for 27. 26 is a book called On Persistence. The 27 book is called Material Remains, Essays on Arts. And so we thought we start with the 26 book, or envisage for 26, the book on persistence. And the idea would be to raise maybe the most, just like a very trivial but also fundamental and very open question. Namely, in what way is or can persistence be an object, maybe even a medium, an obstacle of thoughts? I mean, how to think persistence? In what mode can one think persistence? Does it force us to think it? Does it force us to think it differently? Does it force to think differently? How to approach it?
Yeah, thanks. I've been thinking a lot about persistence these days, and as a kind of rubric for so many things in yeah, I used to be all about melancholia all over the place, um, in the Freudian, but not only Freudian sense as a, as a kind of way of organizing my thoughts, and I didn't, not so much as gravitas or weightiness or pathos or ethical grandeur, but it's obstinacy and intractability, and but also it's underdetermination. And eventually I just can't take all the pieties of memory politics, and I can't fully, you know, disengage melancholia from that. And I've kind of been, I found myself drifting over to persistence as a way of capturing a kind of obduracy, not only of thought, but of action and being, a motive comportment, a temporal rhythm, uh, an aesthetic form, a political energy and strange directionality that I think, politics has to take. Um, and I've been trying to think about really a cluster of affiliated concepts, all of which kind of rhyme a little bit: persistence, insistence, desistence, resistance. Um, I found, though, that I can only really, at first glance, I can really only think of this negatively. And this is constantly something that has been troubling me, and puzzling me. I mean, what it's easier to think of what persistence is not, in a way. Persistence is not intrepidness. It's not all the things it sounds like. It's not intrepidness. It's not resoluteness. It's not exertion. It's not about the, overcoming of obstacles or, triumph over adversity. It's not really steadfastness. Um, but it's so it kind of lacks that heroism, is I guess what I'm trying to say. It's not about diligence. It's not about, it's not really about work or, um, get it done. It's not about patience. It's not, it's not stoicism. But it's not about waiting. It's not in, politically speaking, it's not about reformism, as I guess what I'm trying to say. It's not, above all, it's not resilience. I mean, it's just kind of, it's not about flexibility or just kind of making it somehow. So it's something that's not driven by hope, or by, what Lauren Berlant calls it, cruel optimism. It's not about that. And so, saying all these things, I realize that, I'm making it sound a little bit like God, like something that can only be defined by its negative attributes. But this negative procedure, um, it's because of the need, but also the difficulty of extricating it, if only for a moment, you know, at a time when the reactionary virtues or values of sticking it out. You can do it, try harder, go, 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 work harder. I don't know what to call it. Is it neoliberalism? Is it neo-stoicism? Is it, a new work ethic? I don't know. But I'm trying to isolate something, that's not only ill-adaptive and uncompliant and impatient and inefficient, which seems to, push the very opposite way, it's disorganizing the, normative, temporal, and spatial order that, um, always insists on, doing it better and just kind of and waiting. Um, Even as, as all these negatives, kind of indicate, it's very, very hard to pull, um, to definitively avoid, or avert all these things that I'm sort of pointing away from. So there's this kind of resistance to direction, resistance to, um, to any kind of stability, it's kind of desistance, a refusal of project and program and insistence, and this kind of cluster of not cis, but cyst words, as you can hear, is I mean, this and the way in which it attracts all these prepositional prefixes every way which you turn, I think is really part of what I'm trying to think about. Um, this isn't, proof by etymology or anything like that, but words are, even bits of words can be suggestive. Where cyst is about standing, it's about, it's the, Greco-Latin histemi, sistera, standing verb, which can, which is not about steadfastness or stability. It's a kind of standstill, um, which is also an interference, that kind of sets everything in motion, even while it seems to be stuck. It's about taking a stand and standing up and, not so much sticking it out, but standing your ground. And it can look like a stickiness or a stuckness or an inertia. And that appearance is kind of inevitable. And I mean, there's lots of ambiguities, and in the word stasis itself, and as you know, in Greek it means both stasis in our sense of stagnation and stability, but also, civil war. So when stuckness actually becomes an explosive force, when a deadlock is reached. So this kind of, paradoxical conversion of immobility and eruption. So all those ambiguities are at work in the concept, but and that's just getting to the, part of the word. I mean, and the pair prefix is almost more, kind of proliferating. It sort of feeds into it etymologically, for what it's worth. I mean, it just kind of transforms into the panoply of Greek, the para, the sideness, the sidewaysness, the peri, the kind of attempt to go over um, the the pros, the, forward tilt, the sideways tilt, in fact, it's somehow etymologically related to your German, lovely prefix fair, with its twistiness and this kind of negativity, which is not fully or, always assuredly oppositional. Um, so yeah, so these are all the things that I'm trying to think about under that rubric. And I guess what I'd like to emphasize, just before we go further, it's not just about thinking. It's also about a kind of practice. Um, yeah. Did you did you have further thoughts on this, or did you want me to
I mean, I
say
think the
more?
the next thing we wanted to raise connects kind of well, because it's about certain specific form of practice. Maybe I just give the word to
Mm.
Agon now, because I think it directly connects.
Mm.
Yeah, we were thinking that persistence does not seem to be a virtue, for the simple fact that
Mm.
not everything that persists is good or measured. Uh,
Mhm.
Different from classical practical virtues, persistence differs because it does not describe a form of subjective practice that is unique in style or form, but it's something that can also not be learned. Would you say that persistence is something that insists that there is simply that that is there simply and on ground of the very fact of mere existence?
Um, well, it's not a virtue for sure. I mean, it's not a given, it's not an attribute, it's not a capacity, and I don't know where I locate it even. Is it is it psychological? Is it ontological? Is it historical? Um, there's certainly a normative thrust to what I'm trying to think, but I'm not sure how to, how to define that. I mean, I wouldn't use the language of morality, certainly. Um, it's not unique, that's for sure. I mean, hence the proliferation of roots, all the different, the way in which the pair of directionality seems to veer in all directions. But also because of the proliferation of lookalikes, of imposters and near variants, and the need to go, to think negatively. It's not this, it's not that, it's not resilience, it's not fortitude, it's not forbearance. I mean, it's somehow it's not, it doesn't have any of that muscularity or diligence, but it might seem to. I mean, but that being said, it is a little bit aspirational. I mean, it's never completely not not those things. Um, such as so, the specter of all these, you know, all these muscularities is never far off. And I guess such as the fate of determinate negation, I guess, is so embroiled with its other that it's ineluctably tainted by it, or, something like that. But there is something normative, I think, or aspirational, at least, in what I'm trying to think about. Because I do know the political stakes are high, at a time when, the situation seems so mired down, um, and and sort of um, the forces of violent stabilization are just so, seem to be so intractable. I mean, and where the corresponding, ideological pressure to kind of put up and wait and, or come to somehow work, and survive. I mean, all those things are, so strong. Um, so I think the stakes are very high. I mean, so if I were to find um, an image for this, I guess it might be the figure of the old mole. I mean, it's the figure of a kind of persistence that um, can't quite, it kind of retains its negativity pretty well. And if I were to find, and maybe we can talk about this um, now or later, but if I were to find a concrete, you know, model, I think I would, you know, start thinking about the Palestinian concept of sumud, the kind of this is the, about which I don't think one can avoid, invoking a kind of heroism of this of the staying power and the insistence on, this temporal, spatial, staying your ground. And I think that's I think that's just a moment of persistence, which is, really important to keep in mind now, now more than ever. When you say it can't be learned, um, I'm not I'm not sure that I see it that way. I mean, I think there's a force of repetition here, built into the notion. This repeated kind of almost stuttering movement, which has to not keep on going, but keep on restarting, keep on jump starting itself. I mean, and there's something in that's almost, archival or self-archivizing something, something accumulating, something, some kind of accretion of intermittent practices, which, if they don't cohere, they nonetheless build. I mean, it's a very different model of learning than, anything that could be captured by classical Bildung, or, habituation, or cultivation, or an inculcation of a second nature. But I think there's still some kind of pedagogy here, maybe Brechtian something or other. But so I'm not sure about the not the unlearnability, because in a way it is a learning. It is a kind of learning process. You learn as you go. It can't be taught from outside. Um, so yeah, would it go on?
Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you at
No,
all.
no, go.
No, no, I mean, the question of teachability or unteachability, the question of learnability or unlearnability is interesting because um, um, somehow to persist even in impossible situations, and I mean, I take it that somehow um your practical example point to this. I mean, persistence does something, brings out or brings to the forth somehow something of a situation that can appear impossible to persist in, right? Because it undermines the very, I don't know, grounds on which one relies to persist apart from persistence. So persistence itself seems to do something, seems to be a strange kind of ground, or maybe just does something to distinctions that, and I think that was what Agon just mentioned, to distinctions that are ready at hand once one start thinking about distinction like activity and passivity, or action and reaction, action and inaction, emancipatory or reactionary. So there's something, I don't know, sometimes a certain persistence in even an insisting reacting to a situation can be emancipatory, right? I'm not saying that reactionaries are emancipatory, but I'm saying it
Yeah.
complicates this distinction. And this seems to lead to, let's say, all the disorientations that come with, and we know that in the book you're also will be talking about um, 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 uh, psychoanalysis, obviously, and the, I mean, what maybe one could call the vicissitudes of what Freud's and others, but Freud has pointed out with regard to the drive. So in some sense, and this is where I wanted to take just your thought just right now. It seems that with the drive, what psychoanalysis comes up or sees, invents, discovers as it invents it, is something that justifies it or makes its own existence possible. So a strange kind of entity that allows for psychoanalysis to become that kind of discourse that it is. But at the same time, it complicates that very discourse, or I mean, threatens it with a certain type of, I mean, almost like an existential problem. It's even because it's a type of it's the wrong kind of thing to say, but entity that that on the one hand side is the condition of possibility, or seems to be the condition of possibility of psychoanalysis. On the other hand side, comes very close to, or just is the condition of its impossibility. And from there, like further problems arise, that namely the drive is not just, I don't know, an attribute simply of humans or human subjectivity in the same sense, but it seems to be spilling over or spilling out. And I'm not saying that everything is vibrant, therefore, but I'm saying just like the problems generated in this context seem to be so something persists, and that's something that persists and allows for a certain type of practice and a certain form of discourse, makes that discourse at the very same time immensely complicated, or working through its own impossibility. And I just wondered if you could say something or bring that out some more, where your thought is about this concatenation between, let's say, persistence, drive, maybe drivenness, and its strange dialectics. And yeah.
Yeah, I like this the condition. I like what you. I mean, that's funny. The condition of possibility of psychoanalysis being the condition of impossibility in a certain way. You make it sound like Kanti, the curse of Kantian reason in a way is being driven, fated to be constantly posing questions that it's unable to solve, yet unable not to ask, and so on. But yeah, persistence is another word for the death drive for sure, or for drive itself. It's rhythm, it's obstinacy, it's repetitiveness, it's ambiguity. I mean, it's constant oscillation and it's energy. And so, yeah, so Freud, as you know, at the end of his life, resistance, as he goes along, resistance becomes not only the um, persistence as resistance, persistence becomes, I mean, resistance as persistence, becomes, not only the obstacle or impediment to psychoanalysis, but by that token, not something that's just to be overcome by military means, as it, is at the beginning, but the very condition of possibility, which is to say also, just to get back to your previous comments about possibility, is that is or sort of surviving or functioning in the face of impossibilities. Just to backtrack a little bit, I mean, the category of possibility has to be reinvented. So it's not just doing the impossible; it's actually reinventing the terrain of what is possible. Um, so by historicizing to just be crude about it. Um, but so I mean one of the predicaments I think which is which connects the death drive to the practice of psychoanalysis um, as both governed by the law or corresponding to the logic of persistence is it's obviously the specter of interminable analysis, just the foreverness of it. Um, but what might seem less intuitive, it's obverse. It's brevity, which is a funny thing to say about something about psychoanalysis that it might not be long enough. But those seem to be but it's at least as those two poles are absolutely you know um, are absolutely convergence between an analysis which is truncated. It doesn't go on for long enough. It's not persistent enough, or one of the symptoms of its persistence is actually that paradoxically that you put an end to it. And that's as much a temptation or a tendency of the analyst as it is of the analysand. So this is oscillation, between the two poles of interminable analysis, where you persist too much. I mean, something excessive about persistence. Both of them persist too much, taking too long, forever. But also, that also, what Freud summarizes, in this catchword wild analysis, that it's too quick. I mean, the analyst is too quick with their interpretations. They don't wait long enough. Or or the patient goes rogue by knowing too much. So they already know, like either the subject is supposed to know too much and doesn't rein themselves in. So, reverting to some version of the early analyst, that sort of tells the patient exactly, what the problem is, or the patient that already knows because they've read too much Freud, but when they come in, and this kind of double rhythm of a process which prolongs itself, for all the myriad of reasons that, we see in all Freud's case histories, masochism, secondary gain, self-sabotage, and everything else. But with equal measure, just calling it quits. And one can call it quits by while continuing to, put in years and years and years. It can be too short even when it's too long. And so, um, so there's a little bit of um, I'm talking about the practice of psychoanalysis, but it's so embedded in this theory of the death drive that I don't think one can talk about one without the other. And this this I think has to do with I mean, this pertains very directly to the impossibilities that you mention. Um, so, in the camp of the interminables, I mean, the Wolfman would be the prime case of, just the, where resistance, becomes, luster, is inseparable from his lusterless compliance. He's not that the form of resistance is not resistant enough, basically. On the one hand, it takes too long, so long that Freud actually has to, make a deadline, give him a date, an actual date at which he has to either, put up or, put out or go. So a little bit of, Wolfman, a little bit of Dora, who knows already. I know you'd say that, she says, and slams the door. And so, I think, those are extreme cases, but I think every analysis and analysis itself, I mean, in its very notion is kind of defined by these two, poles. And it's sure it's a technical, clinical problem. You have to keep the analyst on long enough, to establish, enough transference, trust, and so on, but not so long that they become too comfortable and even too comfortable in their discomfort and so on. So that's, these are kind of temporal. I'm describing these in temporal terms, but this temporal paradox, which is kind of what I find most interesting in persistence, is kind of played out in this practice, where the timing, duration, velocity, tempo, rhythm are so, I mean, is so difficult, so difficult to practice, so difficult to theorize. And this is all, this is, this is all the death drive itself, which is all about, this convergence of seemingly antithetical temporalities, wanting it to all be over, as soon as possible, just wanting, wanting to be dead, basically, just wanting to be done with it, whatever it is, call it life or call it what you want, and at the same time wanting to stretch it out forever. I mean, so this strange convergence, this strange rhythm of, seemingly, yeah, this kind of, abruption or impatience, and, this excessive tenacity to life, or at least to the avoidance of death. So how is that possible? So yeah, so this is where the temporality, the death drive seems to be most, you know, literally, and prosaically acted out, in everything that's going on, and in the analyses that Freud is describing, which is really all I'm talking about. I mean, I can't talk about what goes on in other people's offices. Um, so yeah, so that's how I would bring psychoanalysis into it's ineluctably into the picture. I don't think one can think these things kind of except through psychoanalysis. Um,
If we can continue the same, we can follow up, I think, on this. There have been many debates around the drive, like especially in the psychoanalytically informed philosophical circles, uh, and the dangers of the implied vitalism. Like sometimes this
mhm.
is linked to Spinoza or Schelling. So we wanted to ask you, in what sense does the concept of persistence in its dynamic avert or avoid vitalism, if it does do that at all?
Well, it or I certainly want to avoid vitalism, and the specter of vitalism is what comes closest, I guess. It comes very, very close, which is why I, cannot but proceed by via negativa. Can it avert it? I don't know. I mean, such is the way of negative theology. I don't know. Um, but yes, I mean, persistence calls up, you know, unavoidably the conatus from Spinoza to, I would include Nietzsche in this, at least in this regard, to Deleuze and, maybe the late Schelling. So the kind of drive to persevere, which is inseparable for Spinoza and those in his of his ilk. Um, I'm going to make Spinoza very mad here, but from a kind of swell and surge and self-augmentation, self-expansion, self-escalation, self-enhancement, self-aggrandization, and so on. I mean, this is from the throb of the will or vibrant matter, and I mean, it doesn't really matter which side you put it on, whether sort of the sort of seemingly subjective pole or the seemingly ontological pole. There's still still something too virile to my taste, but I don't think it's just a matter of taste. It just feels conceptually wrong and certainly politically wrong, too muscular, too lively, too full of itself. Can persistence avoid, falling into a form of vitalism? Uh, it can, it can. I mean, can it can avoid or try to avoid. I mean, it can persist in its persistence, but it would take a hugely vigorous effort, which would be a little bit self-defeating. So, yeah, but that yeah, that mode of uh, of self-assertion, and I don't think I mentioned it in my little recitation of all the negatives that I began our conversation with, but that's in terms of philosophical culture of today, that's certainly one of the strands that I feel most uncomfortable with, because
I
it's
mean,
the
yeah, sorry.
because it's the other ones are easy to dismiss. I mean, no one really believes in all the things that I was trying to you know I mean, no one, if in our philosophical culture really kind of takes those things seriously. I mean, politically, they have like all the neoliberal virtues of, resilience and so on. But philosophically, they're but this, um, I don't know, yeah, call it, I don't know. I mean, just to get back to this life thing and the way, and I think you were moving on this at the end, Frank, about um, how the the death drive, as Freud elaborates it in the Beyond the Pleasure Principle, becomes more than a psychological, um, yeah, it's no longer simply psychology. It's no longer simply human. He why does he explode, the paradox of this temporal paradox, which is also an ontological one of just this urge and impatience for the inanimate, with this seemingly, endless determination to avoid that inanimacy, which sounds like a clinging to life. Well, it is a clinging to life, right? And he extends that cling and that paradox to all life forms, right down to, the most, minute particles of cellular existence. So yeah, so there seems to be something more than human, something less than human, and so we're kind of, where we kind of are are encouraged, or some have felt encouraged to at this point wade into the swamp of new materialisms, posthumanisms, transhumanisms, new naturalisms, new biologisms, and I don't really know what to do with this. But this is of a piece with the vitalism, I think, that you're alluding to, Agon. Is that what part of what you're getting at?
I mean,
Oh, he's on mute.
um,
Oh, yeah. Okay. Please go ahead. Yeah, it's fine.
you know, I think I mean, the questions were almost, I think, mirror questions, because the moment one says there is, so persistence is another name for drive, and drive is less and more than human, and it's therefore ontologically difficult to place. The specter of vitalism
Mm-hmm.
starts looming. I mean, this and and maybe it's another way of, again, raising, and maybe it's just the wrong question, but raising that issue, because it seems to be not just life that is going on in persistence, right? But something that
Mm-hmm.
characterizes life, maybe a non-vital tendency that keeps life alive, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in this sense in which
Mm-hmm.
you speak about inscribing negativity, or insisting on the via negativa into it. And it seems that, I mean, you will be dealing in that book with a quite not only with philosophers, or not only with analysts, but with, I don't know, Freud, Benjamin, Kant, Beckett, Proust, Shakespeare, just to single out some. Um, um, and maybe this list will change, but that means it doesn't have even just a just just one discursive field, it seems. So something persists in persistence throughout different types of, let's say,
But yes.
discourses, right? Um, and that, I mean, just a spontaneous thought. I mean, Lacan and some Lacanians started talking about para-ontology, because it's not simply an ontological category. Um, I'm not sure if that is the solution, but it's just, I think it's a recognition of a similar problem. So, yeah.
Of where to locate it.
Um,
Yeah. And and to which I would just add just the I mean, this is part of parontology, I guess, but it's just is just always not inject a dose of history, but just the need to, always, this is part of the mutability, and versatility and unlocatability is because of history, it's because of politics, it's because, because things are, embedded in their, and that just have to answer to the needs of the present. But so on this, um, just to move back a little bit to what you were saying about the death, the way in which death or negativity is inscribed in the very life itself, which which wants to keep on living and wants to put off dying, and this kind of paradox itself, that the death drive seems to be entirely compatible with the drive to self-preservation, so that all the binaries that begin the beyond the pressure principle end up kind of getting very murky by the end. And why do we want to live so long? I mean, why given the death drive? And Freud can only come up with this weird, you know explanation that the organism wants to, we, or the organism, or the analysand wants to die in its own way. Like, I'll put an end to it my own way, which is nothing to do with suicide. Actually, it's just, and it sounds almost like a negative version of Kantian autonomy, or Heideggerian being towards death. It kind of sounds a little bit heroic. Um, I need to assume castration as my very own. I mean, you know, sometimes the Zizek bros, you know, sound a little bit that way. Sorry. Not you guys. Where but the interesting thing, is that the very postponement, the very activity of postponement sounds, is so unlively. It's so, the moment itself is mortifying. It's ritualized, it's mechanical. It's, the very process of prolonging life is actually itself deadening. Um, and, I'd sort of think, just two instances that I talk a lot about in my book, that sort of is the old Kant in his last days, the kind of curious, you know, comic turn that's so cruelly ridiculed by De Quincey and so on, about just kind of this kind of ritualized obsessional arrangements of daily life, as sort of mechanical, survival techniques um, to prolong, these protocols of prolonging life, or Proustian, I mean his character, or maybe Proust, I don't know, determination, not to finish, what makes this unfinished so palpable. It's not because he wasn't finished, he or his character. I mean, the book was literally finished, at the very, very beginning. He had written, he knew what the end was. So what accounts for this, this bulge? I mean, that's the just this endless accretion of seemingly fastidious add-ons, which can be kind of deadly. I mean, kind of boredom is also inscribed into that, which is, also because it has real psychoanalytic affinities. So there's a little bit of this in Hegel, I think. The phenomenology was finished, way before, and sort of this huge bulge was, yeah, sure, it's historical contingency happened, like stuff happened, a lot of stuff happened, and sort of this spirit chapter became what it became, and this kind of huge but in some way we have the same logic that something is finished, and yet it has to unfinish itself. It has to expand. And there's a kind of tumorous, death-like thing there, something almost cancerous. So this kind of, which is another way of thinking about it, about a kind of deadliness in self-replicating, a self-replicating form. Um, So, yeah, but in terms of the second part of your question about this kind of um, disparateness of discourses, sort of the promiscuity or versatility or something of persistence, and whether it's, and it's instability. It's not that it's the same thing that just kind of gets applied in different. Obviously, it changes. And yeah, I know this canon that you just listed is kind of, it's the white boy canon. What can I say? This is just what I've been working on recently, and so it's not like I'm not particularly interested in the philosophy slash literature, border question, or looking to literature as a kind of hanger to extract philosophical lessons. And it's not really something thematic that fascinates me in these texts, although the characters I tend to, are markedly unstoic, decidedly unheroic, vacillating, and the energy, the effort that goes into this vacillation is, what fascinates me. Um, so failing again, failing better, can't going on, yes going on, must going on, and so on and so forth. This onwardsness, which the on of Beckett's on, which turns, in the throat into a palindrome of itself. I mean, it sort of becomes it kind of turns into its own negative, but also mutates the negative, the on and the no. It's sort of the power of negation gets gets modulated or complicated, by its mirror palindromic push and becomes perseverant in a in a truly interesting way. But yeah, what I find interesting about these different, these different writing practices is less thematic than that it gives us a kind of it makes us pay attention to the form, to form, I guess. So the syntax, the at the granular level of the word, of the sentences that won't end, books that won't finish, plays that, that don't let you clap, that don't let you take your leave, or that you don't know, or more to the point, that you don't know when it's time to take your take your leave, and nothing of this incompletion. Um, and I guess this takes us back to the via negativa again, but nothing of this incompletion has anything to do with the Kantian romantic style incompletion of the infinite task. When I say nothing to do with that, I mean, of course, that means it conjures that up, but I think it also, formally plants, so many, not just signposts, but obstacles to, falling into that. So that's one of the things I would say in response to into that question about the kind of migratory quality of the concept and the multiplication. It's kind of like an old mole in that respect as well. Like you don't know where it's gonna pop up. And in that respect, no discourse can capture it. And this sounds like idle promiscuity, and I don't, or universality or something like that. But that's not really what I'm referring to. It's about the not the indifference or the neutrality of the concept, but it's ubiquity, but also, yeah, the difficulty of finding it. I mean, the difficulty, but also precisely because it's kind of everywhere, hidden in plain sight. Yeah.
Uh,
So
we
this
wanted.
first book, so this first
Oh,
book,
sorry.
reads a number of these authors that that you just referred to.
Does the category or the concept of persistence have something to do with your earlier work? You discussed Hegel, so we were thinking of morning sickness. There, you show that Hegel is less a thinker of progress than of stuckness, and of the creative potentials of being stuck. The French Revolution was a great historical event that took place, but Hegel is somehow also the great thinker of another revolution, the German Revolution that did not take place. Is that also a form of persistence? The persistence of that which is not, so to speak.
The persistence of what didn't happen. Yeah, the non-revolution, the not even the failed revolution, or the defeat, or I should say the defeated revolution, the multiply defeated revolutions, um, but also the non-revolution, or the counter-revolution, more strongly put. I mean, I thought we weren't supposed to talk about morning sickness. Um, but so the standard narrative of German exceptionality, German belatedness, and so on is that Germany, you know, the narrative around the time that Hegel was writing, certainly that Germany that didn't have its revolution because it didn't have to have its revolution, because it had already had its revolution. It had the Reformation. It had its own German, the real revolution, which is the, revolution of spirit. So it didn't need a political one. And Hegel, is kind of very beguiling in this respect because he seems to be, you know, articulating that trope, but in fact turns it on its head, mean, Hegel turns Hegel on his head in a way that the early Marx even doesn't. So where all his contemporaries, even Heine in places, even the early Marx, in places found in German political impotence. Um, it's in the absence of its own French Revolution, all of the everybody else was finding the German spirit's own radicality, finding an opportunity in that impotence. And Hegel, rehearses all those moves, and you sort of think, oh yeah, Hegel is a big Lutheran, and then suddenly turns that all on his head, and I think, and these become, I mean, these actually become all these positions, all these heroizations, of German lack, the turning of lack into opportunity. Suddenly Hegel, it becomes it becomes the phenomenology of spirit becomes just a unstinting, unrelating parody of all these positions. And so suddenly, yes, I think we're left with just this negativity of something that didn't take place. Um, and this becomes, not a consoling, you know, thought, but becomes, I think, certainly for Hegel's best followers, becomes the 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 place of an imperative, um, to I'm going to just kind of speak a little bit Benjaminianly here, I guess, to to redeem or to take up, the to respond to the pressure of the, revolutions, plural, because there could not be one French Revolution. Um, the failed or aborted or outright missing revolutions in the past to to take up that imperative, so that becomes the legacy, of the non-revolution, and that is why, I mean, that's what for Hegel I think is the is the that's why Hegel I think is the thinker of the of the French Revolution for sure, but by that token of the of the non-revolution, which whose afterlife continues, um, to to pose its demand, and in a time of unrelenting counter-revolution, it's there seems to be something, something at work here, something at stake. So the persistence here would not be, yeah, it would not, it would disrupt any notion of a heritage or some enduring or perduring, value or accomplishment. It's the, it's the ongoingness of a historical demand, that um, which is revolutionary. I mean, it's revolutionary because it's about, because of its negativity. It's about starting again. This is the death drive again. I mean, this actually is it actually is the logic of the death drive. I mean, the death drive, I mean, politically speaking, I mean, psychologically and clinically and literarily, all these things, to do with everything that we've been talking about. But politically speaking, I mean, it's about the most radical form of repetition, which is going back to the beginning, and rebooting, like just starting all over again. This is the rhythm of the 18th Brumaire. It's just that he, describes as the, 19th century versus the 18th century revolutions. Is this, it's the force of repetition or stuckness, all the things that he's kind of mocking and lamenting, but ultimately, I think, embracing, is the opportunity, the need to just take it all over again, to start from scratch, and that is that is the 0 degree um, of a of a of a failed revolution, which becomes a non-revolution, which therefore becomes the opportunity and demand for, to do it all over again. That's what failing better is. It's not a miserableism or a defeatism. It's actually, yeah. So that's why it's also not like let's work harder, let's get it done properly. Let's take it all over again.
Another, I'm not sure if that's would be the right word or not, but another case study of persistence, which has to do with failed heritage and heritage of failure that keep insisting, let me put it like that, and therefore can be modified, metamorph, I can't pronounce that, but generally transformed in such a way that they maybe become, I'm not sure if new chances is that that in one chapter of the book, Niobe is supposed to play a role, and part of your reflections appeared very recently, and that's and the Niobe story is particularly or is vexing and has no different versions, and I'm just to briefly refer to Homer's version. I mean, I think for you, Ovid's might be more crucial, but in Homer, she's presented as the paradigmatic figure of a bereaved and weeping mother who lost all her children, but she lost all her children also because she bragged about her peculiar progenitive excellence, let's say to the wrong entity or to the wrong people, to put it very, very modernly, and that leads to her children being killed, and then things get quite complicated, and I'm leaving out a lot of detail, but ultimately she's turned into stone, which is supposedly somewhere still visible in Turkey. But even as that stone, she still weeps and cries for her children. I mean, as it says or reads in Hamlet, like Niobe, all tears, and this all tears seems to indicate that this stone that Niobe is a very particular kind of stone, because it's a stone that weeps. She's all tears and all stone, but she's not weeping from any, let's say, internal space, or there is no interiority to her after. So that sort of mourning doesn't come from a, let's say, calm and untouched and substantial inner space. So just because it seems to be another, again, maybe that's the wrong way of putting it, but case study in persistence. You call that bit bad mother, and so we thought, what is the stone that is all tears, or is, I don't know, what kind of act makes a bad mother if the bad mother turns into a stone that is all tears?
It's the gods that made her into a bad mother. That piled insult upon injury and made her, effectively complicit in her own suffering. And so the Niobe, the Hamlet reference, of course, is Hamlet's, denigration of his mother's, of the ostentation and falsity of his mother's show of grief, and his determination to pass all show, to embody a kind of mourning and fidelity to the dead, which can dispense with convention, hypocrisy, and all the rest of it. And so that Niobe figure is I mean, Hamlet's Niobe is completely tainted. So Ovid is my go-to person in recounting the terrible, really terrible story of Niobe, um, Niobe's crime and her punishment, and because she really is the figure of excess and on all counts. I mean, and all of its telling brings this out in a way that none of the others surviving, or none of the other extant versions um, do. I mean, she's not only is she too much, too many children, uh, talks too much about her children, is too ostentatious, but she's also foreign and she's Oriental. She's an interloper. She comes from Phrygia or Lydia or somewhere, Eastern. Um, and so a challenge, not only to the, as Ovid tells us, it's not only a challenge to the supremacy of the gods, and a transgression of that boundary of the human, of the mortal immortal boundary, um, which is funny because the punishment kind of makes her immortal. She turns into this, everlasting monument to grief and to herself, as this mountain, which she becomes, um, and as this mountain which won't stop weeping. So she gets to, grief itself becomes major, becomes monumentalized. So the punishment, on the one hand, defines the crime, and the crime becomes the crime. Um, in the punishment itself, but also the punishment in a way, um, it both implicates her, but at the same time, it just it allows for her continuation, her stubbornness um, in mourning itself. So. Yeah, so there's a lot of prolixity there, the multiplying offspring, and then sort of this kind of verbal, um, this verbal copia, it's endless talking, but this concatenation, this coincidence of fixity and overflowing liquid and solid, like the elemental confusion, um, it it materializes, much of, I found this a kind of magnetic object that it materializes, the kind of ontological paradoxes of persistence, and kind of materializes this kind of rigidity and kind of uncontrolled movement at the same time, like the rock and the water and so on. So bad. I mean, Niobe is the bad mother. Ovid sets it up, um, but the story becomes, uh, as do all the pagan characters in Ovid, becomes immediately converted into Christian allegory. So Ovid's metamorphosis becomes rewritten as Ovid moralisé, and Ovid in these kind of these moral allegory books. Niobe becomes this figure of superbia, this kind of most refractory of the deadly sins, pride. So she becomes the proud mother and the exemplar of the exemplar of pride in the Christian moral universe. And so her her chastisement, her suffering, becomes in Dante becomes the punishment. She's the first person that you encounter in purgatory, so that's the first sin that has to be washed off. Um, but the allegorization of Niobe as this, this post-classical allegorization of her fate, her petrification, and her overflow. Um, in a way that moralization becomes another form punishment. That you know her suffering acquires a meaning. And this is what allegory is about: is taking a thing that has no meaning and extracting meaning from. That's the cruelty of allegory that Benjamin describes. So this and it's kind of so in a way, yeah, it's a the badness, the moralization of her story is just so clearly, so painfully illustrates the way, the logic by which a victim gets implicated in their own punishment. And so this is why she becomes the exemplary form of what Benjamin would call mythic violence in his critique of violence essay. This sort of where the law becomes retroactively inscribed, in the transgressor who becomes one only after the fact. So this is and the violence is really crystallized, not only in her petrification, but in the even more petrifying, because more rigid question, what did you do? What's the meaning of this suffering? What did Niobe do to deserve this? And this is the fact that you have to, that the criminal, who's already punished has to deal with that question, compounds the suffering. And that's the nature of the law. So the compulsion to inculpate the victim in their own suffering. So it's not enough to have all your children slaughtered. You actually have to take the blame for it. So there's a lot going on there. And the ambiguity of that story is in its multiple retellings, including the way in which Benjamin mobilizes it, this is Weimar Republic days, right at the point at which the law is showing it's showing its illegality, or it's legalizing illegality, and it is showing how the law reinvents itself at every point. I mean, it's interesting that he chooses her as the figure, but it also shows that the two sides of persistence of a law which persists in reinventing itself, and a victim which is repetitively victimized, and yet who continues to refuse. I mean, she continues to refuse. There's some kind of stubbornness there. So, yeah. So there's a lot. Anyway, there's a lot going on in that figure, I think. And I haven't even started talking about the way in which gender is being inscribed and enforced, and the violence of that, that it's a woman's reproductive activity which becomes the target of the law, of the violence of the law, and so on. That's hugely, a huge part of the story, and what one of the things that makes it so it's more than it seems to be more. I mean, I don't know why Benjamin doesn't, it's not his concern, and that's a troubling moment there. But Benjamin's not great on gender, but he, that's the example is a kind of interesting one, because it just gives us food for thought, particularly at this particular moment, that it demands yet more thinking about the way in which judgment and the law gets gendered and becomes very, very violent.
To turn from Niobe to the disorientation that is part and parcel of your working through the dialectic. what does it mean to rethink it in terms of dramaturgy, maybe Deleuze's Nietzsche of its dramatization. Part of this reworking has been a rethinking of the categories and concepts of tragedy and revolution after Hegel, and involved in reflections on Marx. Could you tell us in what sense there is a dramaturgical aspect of the dialectic? What is theatrical, sorry for that, about it, and what does this do to the concept of revolution, which Marx already in his 18 Brumaire famously described in terms of in theatrical terms.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, first of all, so yeah, so just yeah, so one of the other books that I'm working on is called Dramaturgies of the Dialectic, and it pertains, yeah, directly to the I don't know about the theatrical, but the sort of the dramaturgical dimensions of the dialectic, or and the sort of this nominalization, personification of the dialectic as itself a kind of character that we that we love or hate is an interesting, it's an interesting feature of this, how we personify that. But I like the word. I like the term dramaturgy. Just aside here, I like the doubling of that the doubleness implicit in that word. The drama, which is a doing, and the urgy, which is org. It's ergos. It's orgia. It's work. So there's this kind. It's also just sorry, indulge me for a minute. It's also goes into our words, English words, irk and irksome and orgy, and sounds a little bit bacchanalian, and but this concatenation of drama and urgy, it's two kinds of, it's act or doing piled on act or doing. It's a kind of not just work, but a kind of overwork, and over productivity, which I find suggestive for thinking about the labor of the negative. Something, so productive in dramaturgy that it kind of, as we know, overproduction leads very quickly into unemployment, as we know from reading Capital. So it's a kind of interesting way of thinking about what thoroughgoing negativity might look like, or how we might act it out. So yeah, so phenomenology, or the phenomenology, is of course is explicitly theatrical and dramaturgical and character-like character-like concepts, perceptions, and certainly these kind of are personified. They get on stage, they come on the scene, they kind of are made to write down their words and so on. I mean, but it's more than a metaphor here. I think it's setting, it's making vivid the way in which concepts themselves, it's not just that they have to be applied in practice and show they work in practice, but that's a kind of a crude way of saying what has to be done. I mean, that thought is engaged in this self-testing, self-assessing, self-demonstrating, which also playing itself out, which also means in a public, with someone, with at least n+1 people. So there's a kind of artifice there. And so that's experience. That's the structure of experience. It has to act, in every sense of that word. It has to put itself into act. It has to activate itself. It has to actualize itself in some way that messes up modal categories. It has to perform. It has to, thereby it has to take on not just the hazards of illusion, but it has to embrace those. So to think of Yeah, that's the kind of, I mean, that's my short version of why is dialectic dramaturgical. Um, I mean, to think of history generically in terms of genre, um, or theatrically, um, this is, this is about action. This is about, historical action is not simply action, it's also something, in case of revolutionary action, it's but any action probably, but revolutionary action makes you see it. Um, it not only acts, but it sets the parameters of action. It redefines what it means to act, and that's why. Um, so, and that's that's one thing that's going on, you know, in every revolution that needs to perform itself, that needs to is not simply just to make publicity or to, I mean, that's not irrelevant or inconsequential, but it's also to 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 put on display and to experiment with the very modes of action which are being, reinvented and reconfigured. So there's a kind of, all the ambiguities of act, as a as or a performance for that matter, of actually activating, getting something done, working, and so on, and showing, that you're doing it, which brings with it necessarily the possibility or the, suspicion for those who, that it's just an act. So, yeah, that's these are the dramaturgical dimensions of dialectic. And I could say a lot more about that, and specifically, the kind of the way in which this plays out as, takes tragedy as its dominant genre, but in a way that kind of, maybe breaks with the standard ways of aligning dialectic with tragedy. But those are, yeah, so those are some of the ways in which, I think I'm trying to link the dialectic to dramaturgy, but also, a way of embedding that in history itself.
Um, Thanks so much. We're already approaching very slowly the end of this conversation, and as we are, I mean, normally this podcast is called Philosophy and Its Other Scene, or Scene sometimes. And we wanted to ask you about one other scene that is a bit to the side, maybe, or not, namely, and it's indirectly about poetry. And
Oh,
and the question is, I mean, it's both maybe on the one hand side a bit conceptual, and on the other hand side, just very practical and conceptual, is because we wanted to learn a bit more about an initiative that you're running with two collaborators, a small print press called Espresso Books that produces limited print runs. You do fiction and small essays, but also poetry. And we wondered what kind of role this plays for you. I mean, just actually also for your thought. I mean, we know that you're also now and then, I think, essays of yours are appearing in that through this medium. So what's the idea behind the project? How does it work? Can you tell us a little bit about
mm,
this?
mm. Um, yeah, I'm glad you asked. Espresso Books is a little, it's a little, it's a micro press. We make chapbooks, and primarily poetry. Um, and I mean, just at a trivial, uninteresting, you know, point that is, yeah, I think I just go out even more out of my mind than I already am, just being, if my intellectual, cultural life was defined by, academic work. And certainly it's an alternative to all that, but equally it's a, it's a different form of engagement than, the kind of, public facing stuff that you're supposed to be, doing now. Um, Blogs, memoirs, auto fiction, auto theory, you know, podcasts, and it's a very different thing. It's so unpublic. I mean, it's a very, very small, it's a micropress, it's a microecology, this tiny smatter of writing that's kind of, completely so we, but I hope I don't there's something very perverse here, but I think I'm actually quite committed to local, to local work, and stuff that finds its own public. Books will find their, I mean, I just have a certain stubbornness in producing books that will find their own readers and readers that will find their own books. And I hope this doesn't sound too precious, but this has nothing to do with bibliophilia or connoisseurship, but part of this experiment with poetry, I mean, less so than the other things, is that poetry is a physical object that you hold in your hands and that lends itself to the chapbook form as no other, as I think no other genre does. And this could be considered as a little fetishistic, but I don't really mean it that way. So yeah, this is a super local activity.
So we tend to end, or we always end the podcast with a series of either or questions. You can, I mean, as you're free to the degree that we're free, accept the choice and choose either elaborate or not, or entirely refuse it. And well, I mean, let's see how it goes. I'm just going to read them out, and you tell us what you think. Hegel or Benjamin?
Meaning, do I like one better than the other?
Maybe, yeah. I mean,
Am I
or
supposed to? Or is
no. I mean, depending on our leaning, but no, I mean,
What's the
would
right
you?
answer?
Is there a leaning towards one or not, or is that even a question that makes any sense?
My superego points me towards Hegel,
Okay.
and that has
Um,
forced me to love him.
I know that feeling. Um,
Yeah.
Benjamin or Derrida?
And oh, but Benjamin, I began life as a card-carrying Derridian, but Benjamin is my guy. Yeah.
Logic or
Probably an answer to
phenomenology?
the first question as well. Can I take it
Yeah.
back then?
Yeah, okay. Okay. I like that. Logic or phenomenology?
Meet the logic and the phenomenology.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, kind of. Well, I'd have to say phenomenology, although, yes, you, Frank, know more than anybody that we made a devil's pact some time ago that we were committed to the neither of the to the
Yeah.
neither the both and to the hinge and dash connecting the two. So I'm not really supposed to choose favorites, but I would say the phenomenology, yes.
Okay, get that. Pure reason or anthropology?
You mean Kant?
Hmm.
Hmm. Well, if you mean Kant, I guess I should say the first critique also. But I have a certain loyalty to his, I have a certain loyalty to the minor, to the minor part of the canon. So um,
Yeah.
I actually do confess I find the anthropology, very, very generative.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Stone or water?
But I mean, I'd have to say stone, but haven't we just said that they're the same thing?
Yeah, kind of.
Uh, but But by the way, just one more thought, just to go back to our early part of our conversation about psychoanalysis, this does bring me back. I mean, the stone water thing, it does bring me back to something which is not unconnected to the possibility of psychoanalysis and this kind of this question of interminability or abruption and or the sort of two long to shortness of it, that, Freud, characterizes the two problem kind of almost characterologically, types that are difficult to to sustain analysis, the kind of those with the overly adhesive, and those with overly, with too much motility, so either, this rigidity or fluidity, either something, that's just things don't move because the patient analysand kind of gets stuck, or they move too fast because there's, nothing, everything kind of rolls off. So these are the two kind of impediments to, to interpretation, these libidinal types that he describes. So I was just thinking that when we're thinking about stone and water here, as, as the, sort of the elemental, embodiments of, kind of death drivey, the antinomy of the death drive, but also of psychoanalysis itself. Anyway, just that just kind of popped into my head there. Were there other ones?
Yes, there are just a few more. Niobe or Antigone?
Well, Antigone, like Electra, is already a Niobe manqué or Niobe wannabe, so why not go straight for the real one?
Endgame or Waiting for Godot?
I don't know. Endgame, I guess.
Okay. Just three more. The Castle or the Trial?
That's not fair.
Okay. And kind of a spin-off, Power or Resistance?
No.
Okay. And the last one, To Teach, to Govern, or to Analyze?
Wait a minute. I thought there were just supposed to be two.
Yeah, yes.
Well, I would say analyze, but only because the other two just involve too much admin. Um, but um, but wait, is this a trick question? I mean, are you talking about the Lacan's four discourses without
No, rather
don't I
about
get
the
don't
impossible
don't I
professions.
get to pick the option of to hystericize, to teach,
Yes.
to govern, to analyze, master, university?
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
I mean, these are the three that Freud enumerates as impossible
Right.
professions,
The
right?
impossible. Oh, okay. I get it.
So,
Okay. Yeah. But yeah, okay. Uh, well, I don't think I'm in the position of the analyst by by a long stretch,
um,
or
well,
of the
this was.
politician. So I guess that just leaves me.
Um, thank you so much. This was
Oh
wonderful.
yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Thank you
Thank you
for
so
taking
much,
the
Rebecca.
time.
Yeah. Thanks. Nice to see you guys.
Indeed.